Hi there. Welcome to the May wrap-up part 1 for me, but for you, you'll get the whole thing. I'm gonna be filming this in chunks because I feel like that's the best way for me to talk about it, because going a whole month without talking about a book is weird for me. Anyway, I have 4 I want to talk about right now. So let's start with Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. It's about a kid growing up, striking out on his own and moving to Winnipeg, and just about his family and his life growing up. And I ended up giving this one 2 stars. I think it is stronger than 2 stars, but I really didn't enjoy reading it. The biggest problem is the way that the story is structured. It's quite short, but it's also very short chapters that are sort of vignettes of a scene, but then within that scene you can also get like a flashback to something else that's going on. And so there isn't really a driving narrative. Like, I don't know where we're going in the story, and so I found it really hard to be engaged. There were a lot of parts that I really liked, especially with Jonny's relationship with his grandmother. Those scenes were all really interesting, but I don't think that it worked as a novel. I know Joshua Whitehead has written poetry in the past, and I feel like that's sort of where he shines for me. There was a lot of beautiful writing, and the narrative was the weakest part of it. Next is Accidentally Engaged by Farah Heron. This is a romance between a woman and a man that her parents have set her up to marry, and a lot of it is about the family dynamics of the heroine and her own kind of struggles in her work life, and the romance kind of seems tacked on. I really didn't love the hero of this. There were parts that I really enjoyed him, but he didn't feel really well fleshed out, partially because this is a single POV romance. Romances should never be single POV. I'm gonna say it every time because it makes me mad. So he never really developed as a character outside of, I like the girl. And then everyone has secrets and a bunch of family drama happens, and it got overblown. Like, the romance wasn't really the focus. There were way too many side characters. There were way too many things going on in the plot that distracted from the romance. It also solidified now a thing that I don't like in books, specifically sourdough starters. I read Sourdough by Robin Sloan, and I really didn't enjoy it. And so I don't know if I hate sourdough starters because of that book, or altogether sourdough starters just really aren't my thing. I also think cooking maybe just isn't my thing in books, because this did also have a big cooking aspect, because Rena's main personality trait is that she bakes bread, and so we never shut up about bread, and I don't know, I'm just not here for it. I also read some Goodreads reviews that said that they didn't appreciate the Muslim rep in here. Both of the leads are Muslim, but it is strange that it feels like they go out of their way a lot of the time to be like, but I'm not like other Muslims, which I don't know. I would suggest reading those reviews for yourself. I can definitely see where they're coming from with that, so just something to be aware of. I ended up giving this one 3 stars because there's nothing technically wrong with it. The writing was all fine. Like, I don't have any problems there. It just wasn't exactly what I wanted out of it. Next we have Triptych by Karin Slaughter. This one I DNF'd after 1 chapter. Normally I wouldn't mention DNFs, but I talked about it in my May TBR where I had to read all of the books or else I would have a punishment. And so it's a gray area because you cannot convince me to finish that book. It starts off with a cop and he has trauma from the war, and he's investigating a quote dead hooker, and it just wasn't the vibe I was going for. It was also written in 2006, so I anticipate if I already don't like it, it's probably gonna continue that way. just for especially the language, stuff like that. But I don't know whether it qualifies for my challenge. I think for the purposes of why I'm reading this book, a DNF is totally valid, but I don't know, I might be nice and say I lost the challenge and let my husband pick a book for me. We'll see. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, I just couldn't be bothered to care about this one. I am perfectly happy DNFing it. Next up is Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is Riley Sager's first novel, and I've heard a lot of people don't really enjoy it, like say that he gets better over time. I really enjoyed it. I gave this one 5 stars. I'm still not sure that it's my favorite for reasons, but it is the best one. It's the most cohesive, it's the most propulsive, it's the most gory. It's kind of a perfectly crafted thriller. It's very simple. I feel bad saying that, but I feel like that's the only way to get across what I'm doing. Like, it's twisty, but it's not that twisty. It's sort of more quiet, which is weird for a book that opens on a girl running away from the massacre of all of her friends in a dress that was white but is now red from blood. What an opening! Like, I really enjoyed it, and it's told in dual timelines during the Pine Cottage Massacre, that's what they call it, where Quincy was the final girl, the only one left alive, and then also 10 years later where she's now famous as a final girl and there are other final girls in the world and they all kind of know each other, and drama ensues from there, and I really enjoyed it. Simple feels like the wrong word for it. It's very safe and something you'll feel like you've read before, but with enough interest that like it's still a really unique story and you still really enjoy what you get to experience. And I thought the writing was great, and I thought the gore was great. I thought all the reveals were really well timed. I flew through this one, so it has to be 5 stars. The next 2 books that I read really honestly kind of put me into a slump. I started one and I wasn't really feeling it, so I started a second one to sort of like have something to bounce back and forth between. And then that one wasn't really doing it for me, but I have to read all of these books in May, so I just kind of had to barrel through. So the books that I read were, I can never remember this title, Butter Honey Pig Bread by Francesca Ekwuyasi. This was a book about a family, the mother and 2 sisters. The mother believes that she is an evil spirit, basically, that never should have been born, and it follows her through her life, and then the 2 daughters who are twins. In theory, this was a good book. There was a lot that I liked about it. I thought all of the characters were really strong, but I didn't enjoy sort of the genre, I guess, because it's both literary fiction and magical realism. It's hard to tell if it's magical realism because, like, is she the spirit that she says who can sort of communicate with her ancestors, or is it like a mental health thing? And that never really gets explained or explored, so it really could go either way, I guess. But I think because it wasn't explained, I leaned more into the magical realism camp, which would have been fine, except that it's told from 3 POVs, and only one of the POVs is that, so it's hard to recalibrate. Basically switching from contemporary to more fantasy, that wasn't something that really sat with me, though I know it would work for other people. The 3 storylines, there's one, the sister Taye, hers was definitely the most interesting. I think if the book had just been her POV, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. She has a lot of explorations of what it means to be a part of her family, what it means to be queer, questions about like where is your home, and all of the relationships that she has are really interesting. She meets a lot of really interesting people all around the world. She has some cool friends that are fun to hang out with. The book would have been stronger for me if it had just been her. I'm giving this one 3 stars. It was fine. I get it. I'm happy that I read it, but it was never going to be something that was really going to work for me. I also read this one at the same time with my eyeballs and earballs, and that is definitely the way to do it, because having someone read the accents to you makes it more immersive, and it also makes some of that phonetic writing less annoying. There isn't a ton of phonetic writing, but it is one of my pet peeves. The other book that I was reading at this time was The Trouble with Hating You by Sajni Patel. This one was partially my bad because it has the same audiobook narrator as Accidentally Engaged, which I didn't know when I picked it, and they're extremely similar. Like, they both open with the daughter is being set up with a man to marry by her parents, and she doesn't want that, and then eventually she falls for the guy. So it took a while. This one, though, was a very strange book. I felt every emotion under the sun. Most of them rage. There's some family drama in here. I really don't like family drama in my romances. That's something I've learned. I found it distracting from the main storyline, and also the leads in it I feel like weren't consistent. Like, it's a hate to love by the title, but their progression didn't make any sense. It felt really out of nowhere, or like they would be completely irrational and then the most rational people and then back to being irrational, or like they would sit down and have a mature discussion and then the next day they'd be like, why do you hate me? Just out of nowhere. I really didn't enjoy that. It was a roller coaster of a read, but there was a lot of stuff that was really well done and did make me sob. Not for romance related reasons, for some of the family drama stuff. It was hard. It was not happy tears, I'll tell you that. I'm giving this one 3 stars just because I don't know what else to rate it. Anything lower seems wrong, anything higher seems wrong. Another book that I finished was Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. This is an itty bitty play that the movie My Fair Lady is based on. I was gonna do a whole video about this because I love it so much, but it ended up not really coming together in my brain, and also I don't know who really cares about this. But I really enjoyed reading it. The first 2 acts, it's in 5 acts, the first 2 were almost word for word what the movie was. So it was kind of boring, just because it's like, I've seen this so many times before, why do I need it again? But then 3 through 5 were quite different and do change quite a few things, especially the ending. Spoilers for the ending if you care. Right at the end, Eliza and Higgins have a big blow-up fight and they promise to never see each other again. And in the movie, at the end, she comes back and it's like implied that they reconcile. In here, she just walks away, which I loved. Like, I love both. And I totally understand like changing the movie to wrap up nicely. Like, you don't want audiences leaving theaters just being like, wow, that was a play about a horrible sexist man and I'm glad he got what he deserved. Like, it is nice that they sort of reconcile in the end, but I found it a really powerful statement in here that they don't. Higgins is not treated like the hero. I found that really nice. Give this one 4 stars just because I didn't get that 5-star feeling, but I am really happy that I read it. I think I've read it before. Oh, I also marked it up a ton. And the last book I want to talk about right now that I just finished this morning in my hammock, it's a beautiful day outside, is They Never Learn by Layne. Fargo. 5 stars. It's so good. It's so good. So I picked this up for the Literally Dead book club. I think this is the March pick. And it was sold to me as a female serial killer. And then I stopped listening because, yes, exactly. It's hard to know what's a spoiler in here because it's not super twisty. There are definitely some twists, but for the most part, you're just kind of along for the ride. But from the back it says, every year, Dr. Clark searches for the worst man at Gorman University and plots his demise. So every year she picks the worst man on campus and kills them. And it's wonderful. It's so good. It's so unputdownable and rage-inducing because she's searching at the worst man on campus. There's a lot of sexual assault stuff in here that is hard to read a lot of the time, and a lot of victim blaming and a lot of administration sweeping stuff under the rug, and it's so frustrating. But I think that is what made it work. Like, you had such strong emotions about it. It made the morally gray character really work for me, and I'm so happy with this. I cannot recommend it highly enough, barring all of the sexual assault triggers in here. A lot of creepy dudes. Really, really happy with this one. I was thinking, after I finished some of those other books, I was thinking, like, do I like reading or do I just like thrillers? I think I might just like thrillers. And this book is a top-notch thriller. I think the fact that it doesn't have to rely on a ton of twists to be good is the sign of a really good novel, and I am just so happy. I did some bookshelf reorganization. I can't tell if I hate it. Do you hate it? It's unclear. This whole thing is a work in progress. It is now May 31st, getting in right under the wire, and I have 2 more books to talk about. The first one is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yōko Ogawa. I originally heard about this from Emma at Drinking by My Shelf, and she loved it, and I also loved it. This was 5 stars for me. It's a really short book about a housekeeper and a professor. The professor has an 80-minute short-term memory. He had an accident and now he can only remember 80 minutes at a time. And it's about his relationship with the housekeeper and the housekeeper's son. It's interesting how she manages to do a really good job of exploring a lot of depth with these characters when their relationships are so atypical. The professor is a professor of mathematics, or I guess was before his accident, and so there's a lot of math stuff in here, which I love math. I was always a big math nerd. I do wonder if you don't like math, how this would translate. Like if you would get bogged down in all of the math stuff. Let me find something for you. There's this book here where he's explaining something with the theory of how you make good triangles. So there's fun little diagrams like that throughout that I really enjoy. Also, there's no way you'll be able to see it here, but on the edge there's these very tiny numbers up top that are pi. This whole length of the book is the beginning of pi, which is cute and fun. There's also a big focus on baseball in here, which I am not into baseball, and I did find that sort of bogged down. So if you don't like math or baseball, I don't know how this is going to work for you, but it really worked for me, and I thought it was a really sweet story. I thought this was going to hurt me. I thought I was gonna cry and be devastated, but I didn't. It ended up being a really sweet ending instead of something like to manipulate you into crying. It didn't do that, which I really appreciated. I just thought it was a really solid book. This one is also translated from Japanese, so that's cool. Now, the final book that we have to talk about is the book that my husband chose for me. So I was talking to him and we decided together, or he manipulated me into agreeing that my DNF of Triptych didn't count. Like, I didn't complete my TBR for May, and so he chose a book for me and I had time to read it in May instead of June, so I did it. He chose Gideon the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. This is a book that I had previously DNF'd twice, and he thought, that's not good enough, do it again. So I completed it this time. I had to get the audiobook. That was the only way I was going to make it through this, and it was not worth it. This is going to be a 1 star for me. There was a point where I thought it might end up being a 2 star, but it's not. The concept of this book is great. I think the tagline is something like lesbian necromancers in space, which, sure, I'm on board. I think more what it ended up being was like the necromancer Hunger Games. Yeah, that's pretty close. And that sounds great, but it just didn't work for me. There's something about this author's writing that just doesn't stick in my brain. Like, she'll just be talking about something and the sentences don't compute. It's very strange. I don't know how to explain it. I know Meg was talking about a book that she had a similar experience with recently, so I know I'm not alone in this concept, but it's very strange unless you've experienced it. So the audiobook was definitely the way to go. It also helped with distinguishing the characters' voices, because Gideon, being the 9th, naturally means that there are 8 preceding houses and a whole lot of characters with a whole lot of names that are different from their titles that relate to which house they're in, and it's extremely confusing. That's the theme of this book, is confusing. I didn't know where we were a lot of the time. I didn't know who was speaking. I didn't know why we were here. I didn't know who was related to who in what way, and then people start dying, and so like, what was the point in me learning all about these people for them to just get knocked off one by one? They don't all get knocked off, but like, they're necromancers. Death is a pretty big part of this book. Really interesting concepts, but poor execution. I know I'm alone in this one. This one has a really high rating on Goodreads, but it just didn't work for me. And I knew that the first time, like when I DNF'd it twice, I knew that this was just not gonna be my kind of book. It's sold to you as sci-fi, but it's fantasy. I can see no world in which this is considered sci-fi, which is extremely frustrating because I do love sci-fi and I don't love fantasy. Really interesting concepts in here and some cool necromantic stuff going on, but this was not the vehicle for it. I really had to push myself through this one. And even though the audiobook helped, I still really didn't know what was going on most of the time. In conclusion, I read 9 books this month, and I did read all of the books on my TBR, minus the 1 DNF, but I tried, and that's what's important to me, even though my husband is evil and he hates me. Oh yeah, I should mention he read this book before me, and he gave it 2 stars, so he just hates me. And he keeps talking about how he wants to read the sequel. Like, don't put yourself through it. It's not worth it. 9 books, very happy with it. Very excited for June. I've been holding off on starting my June TBR until June 1st, but it's like 5 o'clock on the 31st, so I might give myself a little leeway. There's nothing I'm gonna be able to read in 6 hours, and I'm gonna have to read something tonight, so I'm gonna get started on that June TBR, which is very exciting. If you haven't checked out the Read the Rainbow intro, go ahead and do that because it's gonna be fun. All right, thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.